On the morning of May the 19th, 1977, 20-year-old Colleen Stan left Eugene, Oregon to visit a friend in California, almost 650 kilometers away.
It was my friend's birthday that day, and I just decided that I was going to go down and surprise her. I went out and my car was on the blink and I couldn't get it to start. So I thought, oh, no problem, I'll just hitchhike.
In those days was the hippie type days. There was kids hitchhiking all over. She wanted to get out and go and do her own thing.
Well, I was young, and I just felt that I had the world at my disposal, you know.
Colleen managed to hitch rides with several truck drivers. By early afternoon, she had reached Red Bluff, California, less than 160 kilometers from her destination.
At Red Bluff, the truck drivers dropped me off at I-5, and I had to walk up the off-ramp up to Highway 36. So I start trying to hitch ride. There's 5 guys in there, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you a ride. We'll take you wherever you want to go. And I turned them down because I thought me and 5 guys wasn't a good match.
It wasn't long before another car stopped. Colleen was relieved to see a young couple with a baby.
I just saw this guy. He was really kind of geeky looking. And the lady, she looked pretty average. So I hopped in the back seat of their car. I noticed this guy, he's looking in the rearview mirror. I got kind of creepy feeling at that point. Five, 10 minutes goes by. They stopped at a gas station. And I got out and went into the bathroom. I don't know if it was God, an angel, whatever. But there was a voice. And it was telling me to jump out the window and run and never look back. And I just kept thinking, this is crazy. I get in the back seat of the car, and there's this strange wooden box sitting on the seat next to me that wasn't there before. And I looked at it, and I didn't know what it was, so I kind of ignored it. We probably traveled maybe another 20 minutes or so. And they asked me, is it all right if we stop and look at these ice caves? I was just gracious that they had stopped and given me the ride. So I said, if it's not going to take very long, that's fine. You know, I don't care. And so he turns on this road. So they stopped, and the wife and the baby got out, and they went down to this little creek. And I'm looking around wondering, well, what happened to this guy? Where'd he go?
For Colleen, the answer came all too quickly. In May 1977, Colleen Stan hitched a ride with a young couple. But when they stopped to look at a cave, Colleen's life took a horrific turn.
So he puts this box over my head. It had hinges, so it kind of opened up like a clam or something. Went over your head, had a hole for your neck, so that your head is totally encased inside this box when it's closed up. The box was very confining, very, claustrophobic. And he had insulated it with carpet so that if I should yell out, nobody's going to hear me. I was very frightened, and of course I'm just wondering, what are these people going to do to me? Are they going to kill me? Are they going to rape me? I hear the woman and the baby getting back in the car, and he starts the car and they turn around, go back to the highway.
Colleen was driven back to the town of Red Bluff, California. They stopped at a small house. The box was removed from her head. Blindfolded, Colleen was taken inside the house and down to the cellar.
So here I am, suspended by my wrist. It was very painful. And he starts whipping me. I see him and his wife, and they're having sex. And I guess he finished having sex with his wife. He comes over, and he's putting his hands on me and running his hands up and down my body, and I blacked out.
When Colleen regained consciousness, she was being unhooked from the ceiling.
He walked me across the basement to a corner of the basement, and he had this, for lack of a better way to describe it, it was like a crate box. I'm blindfolded, I didn't see it, but I can just tell from when I sat in it, that's what it felt like. He put the head box back on my head, and he just went away. And so that was basically the first night that he had me. I was totally freaked out, very panicked, and just totally terrorized by everything that was happening to me.
The man tortured her daily.
And the only thing he would ever say to me was to give me a command, tell me to get up, stand up, shut up.
And it wasn't only the male abductor who tormented Colleen.
His wife, for what reasons I don't know, she came over and she bit me on my side while I was hanging there.
Colleen soon learned the woman's name.
When they were down in the basement and tortured me, and he said, "Jan, get something." So I knew her name was Jan.
What Colleen didn't know was that Jan was Janice Hooker, and she was just happy to have someone else take her place. In 1973, Janice was a plain, insecure 15-year-old, suffering from epilepsy and low self-esteem, when she met 19-year-old Cameron Hooker.
She'd never been allowed to date. She'd never been allowed to wear shorts, wear a two-piece bathing suit, for example. She was raised by overly strict parents. And so when Cameron Hooker entered her life, she had no experience. She was very naive. She was easily manipulated.
By all outward appearances, Cameron Hooker was an unremarkable individual.
Cameron was a very quiet type of person. In fact, when he first met Janice and he asked her out, she said, "You'll have to talk to my parents, but they've never allowed me to go out before." Cameron goes to the house and in a very short period of time convinces those overly strict parents to allow her to go out on a date with him.
Cameron quickly persuaded Janice to allow him to undress her and suspend her by her wrists from a tree.
Cameron Hooker is a sexual sadist. A sexual sadist is an individual who is aroused by the suffering and fear of another person. It's not the infliction of pain that's arousing to the sexual sadist, it's the suffering of the victim. But however, he will use physical and emotional pain as tools to elicit that suffering.
It was painful and humiliating to Janice, but she desperately craved the affection Cameron showed her.
Janice initially agreed and went along with this because for the very first time in her life, she was allowed to date a young man. She had no frame of reference. She assumed that this was, in fact, sex.
Cameron soon started whipping Janice while she was suspended.
When Cameron Hooker was torturing Janice, it played into a long-term goal, and that was to shape her sexual responses, to shape her attitudes towards sex as being accepting of what was going on with him. It also convinced him that she was naive. It convinced him that she was easily manipulated and that he was going to be successful.
On January the 18th, 1975, Cameron and Janice married. But his treatment of her only became more vicious.
He wants to have a sexual slave. Janice is going to be his first sexual slave.
After several years, Cameron's cruelty escalated to a point where Janice could no longer tolerate it.
Cameron wanted to have a sex slave, a woman who he could perform bondage on, who couldn't say no. Janice wanted to have a child, so they agreed that Cameron could have this sex slave. Janice would get pregnant and have a child, and he would practice bondage on the person who would be kept against her will.
Now, to you and I, that sounds crazy. She couldn't possibly agree to such a thing as this. But what we have to understand is that he had a very pliable personality to work with from the get-go.
Some experts call this a compliant victim.
A compliant victim is a woman who is compliant or acquiescent in her own victimization in return for some trade-off. He rewards her by allowing her to have a baby. He will exchange her having a baby in return for his being able to have a slave.
So she agreed to this, but part of the agreement was he could have a slave, but he was not to have any sex with the slave. The sex was reserved for her.
More than a week after she had disappeared, Colleen's parents, who lived in California, received a call from her roommates in Eugene, Oregon.
When she didn't show up, they called us. We decided to, go ahead and head up there and see, if we could find her.
They drove from their home to Oregon. They reported their daughter missing to several police departments along the way. But Colleen had disappeared. Throughout the summer and autumn of 1977, Colleen was kept, naked and blindfolded, in the coffin-like box built by her captors in the cellar of their home.
The first 3 months, I never even went out of the basement. I really wasn't ever in a situation the first, couple months to even try to escape. Pretty much the routine became he would come down in the evenings, give me something to eat, something to drink, let me use a bedpan, and then he would hang me up, whip me.
From Cameron Hooker's point of view, the isolation of the victim is extremely important. He doesn't want her to have any input from anyone else other than himself. He wants to become the absolute ruler of all aspects of her life.
In January 1978, 8 months after abducting Colleen, Cameron Hooker got an idea from an article in one of his bondage magazines.
Pornography played a very important role in the shaping of Cameron Hooker's sadistic and violent fantasies by giving him new ideas.
He came down one night, and his wife came down, and he makes me read through this contract, and it goes through all this kind of legal-like wording about how I'm signing over my body and soul to him, and that he owns me, that I couldn't say no to him for anything. In the contract, it stated that I was to address him as master or sir, and that I was to address her as ma'am.
The slave contract played a very important role as far as Cameron Hooker was concerned. Number one, it lent some legitimacy to what he was doing. Number two, it served as a prop for his sadistic fantasies, having a slave. And number three, it validated his power over another person, specifically his power over Colleen Stan.
And it also stated that he would affix a collar around my neck, which he did.
Cameron Hooker then told Colleen about an organization he called the Company. Its supposed function was to enforce the slave contract.
Cameron Hooker tells her that there's a company that is an underground network of slave traders
Created to help keep slaves in line if they were disobedient or they tried to run away. They were like, go ahead and pick up the phone. They're listening. Go ahead and walk out the door. They're watching the house. You might as well just put a shotgun to your head and pull the trigger because they're going to get you.
Cameron told Colleen that Janice had once been a slave and that she had tried to escape. He claimed he had married her to save her from being executed.
Janice Hooker went along with the stories about the company, quote unquote, because she was very used to his perverted fantasies. And this was just another minor exaggeration of his fantasy. It's certainly nothing for her to become concerned with. She had a kidnapped victim living in their home. That was a major issue. The company was a minor issue as far as Janice Hooker was concerned.
Once I signed the contract, he started bringing me upstairs to do things like clean the kitchen, do the dishes, mop the floor, whatever, do stuff like that.
Colleen's arrival in the household gave Janice Hooker two rewards. Number one, she no longer had to clean house. There was now a slave to clean house. And number two, she no longer had to suffer through the whipping and the beatings as much as she had in the past. That was a reward that she considered to be a very valid one.
But Colleen's humiliation and torture continued.
Whenever he hollered out attention, no matter what I was doing, I was to run over to this archway, strip off my clothes, throw my hands up onto the top of this archway, and he grabbed a whip, and he whipped me.
Some people may ask, how can a person like Colleen Stan, who's had a relatively normal life, so quickly go into that slave mode? Human beings are very adaptable. We can adapt to almost anything. In this particular case, Colleen Stan's adapted to her new role in life, which was a slave.
I tried to be a good slave because I was too afraid of the company.
But even being a good slave didn't stop Cameron Hooker from intensifying his brutalization of Colleen. By February 1978, Colleen Stan had been held captive for 9 months. She was regularly whipped and degraded and forced to do housework for her captors, Janice and Cameron Hooker. Then, Janice Hooker made an unexpected suggestion to her husband.
She said something to him like, if you want to, you can have sex with... My slave name was Kay, with Kay. I think that she was thinking that he would honor the deal and not have sex with me. So he just marches his butt right on down to the basement, gets me out of the box, takes me upstairs, ties me up to the bed, and proceeded to start raping me.
When Cameron Hooker starts having sexual intercourse with Colleen, what he was doing at that point was violating the pact or the agreement he had with his wife, and it changed the dynamics between Cameron Hooker and his wife.
Once that door was opened, there was no turning back. I would say that he was probably raping me at least once a month after the first occurrence.
4 months later, Cameron and Janice bought an acre of land not far from their existing house and moved into a mobile home. They took Colleen with them. Because there was no cellar in the new home, Cameron Hooker devised a new way to imprison Colleen.
They had a waterbed, and what he did was he constructed these boxes underneath the pedestal of the waterbed. Basically, has me get down on my knees and tells me to crawl in this box. So, I crawl in there, he closes it all up, and this is my new home, for lack of a better word.
Colleen spent the rest of 1978 living in the box under the bed. She was let out infrequently, usually to perform housework or to be whipped, tortured or raped by Cameron Hooker. At Colleen's home, her disappearance was taking a toll on her family.
I was beginning to think that maybe she was in some kind of a cult or something, a lot of that was going on back in those days. Runaway kids that, would get in those cults.
Hundreds of kilometers away, Cameron Hooker had Colleen help him build a shed in the back garden. Inside the shed, he would tie her up, whip and torture her. The amount of time Cameron was spending with Colleen did not go unnoticed by Janice.
She was aware of everything all along. The only thing she didn't know about was the rapes that were occurring. But she knew about everything else that was going on. She was fully aware of it.
She felt some sense of relief because he was practicing the heavier bondage on Colleen, but she had other feelings as well.
She didn't like me, and she didn't like me being there.
2 years into her captivity, Cameron Hooker removed Colleen's collar and allowed her to work outside in the garden.
When he takes the collar off of Colleen, he's convinced she won't escape because he has convinced her of the existence of the company. Besides, fear is her collar.
By December of 1980, Colleen, now 23, had been missing for 2.5 years. Cameron Hooker gave her a Christmas present.
And he said, I'm going to allow you to call home. I didn't know why. And he said, but I'm right here. If you say anything that I don't want you to say, or if you screw up in any way, I'm cutting the phone off and I'm going to make you wish you hadn't said it.
I felt great to hear from her.
And he's like, well, why haven't you called? And I was really vague about it, as vague as I could possibly be about everything.
She didn't really sound like the old Colleen.
And then he's like, cut it off. And so he hung up the phone and the conversation was over.
It was really an exciting moment for us.
Cameron Hooker was a sexual sadist. Cameron Hooker was the one who convinced Janice Hooker to allow him to act out his fantasy. Does that alleviate her responsibility? Does that reduce her responsibility in the commission of the crime? Absolutely not.
Colleen was allowed certain freedoms by the Hookers, who knew their slave would not disobey because of her belief in the company.
I was out working in the garden and jogging. But I never told anyone the truth about what was going on.
She had been programmed to believe that the company was watching her every move.
I truly and honestly believed in the company and that they would hurt me.
Colleen Stans came to accept what Cameron Hooker explained to her about her life, about the company, because that's all she was subjected to.
Colleen soon received a reward for her years of servitude.
It was in March of 1981. He said that the company had okayed it for me to go and have a visit with my family.
On March the 20th, Cameron took Colleen to see her family in Riverside, about 200 kilometers away.
As we were driving down the interstate, he's prepping me what to say. He said to tell them that he was my fiancé. He was going to a seminar down in the San Diego area, so he thought it was a good idea for me to go and spend some time with my family since I hadn't seen him in so long.
Cameron also told Colleen her father's house was being watched by the company. And if she tried to tell the truth, they would kill everyone inside.
I was not only scared for myself, but I was scared for my family or anybody else who may help me, that they would also harm those people.
Colleen provided few details about her life, and her family was reluctant to ask.
I didn't want to push her where she was because I was afraid then we wouldn't hear from her.
I felt that the company was watching, was listening, was there in the neighborhood, and I didn't want my family to get hurt, so of course I didn't want to say anything that would put them in jeopardy.
Colleen's visit came to an end less than 24 hours later.
So he shows up, and my dad's wife, she says, let me get a picture of you guys. In the meanwhile, they're asking him, questions like, well, where do you guys live? And can we get your address and your phone number? And he's making all these excuses and saying that, well, we're in the process of moving. We'll forward that information to you, which of course never happened because it was all a lie.
Cameron took Colleen back to Red Bluff. where she suddenly found that the few freedoms she once had were now gone.
I was pretty much for 3 years after that exclusively locked up in the box.
And she was placed back in the box beneath the bed because he wanted to keep her off balance. He wanted to convince her that she was back in her role as a slave and take away from her any feelings of goodness that she experienced as a result of being free for that brief period of time.
Janice's feelings towards Colleen provided further reason for the isolation.
Janice would complain about Colleen. Cameron Hooker was spending a lot more time with Colleen than he was with Janice, and that did cause Janice to feel some jealousy towards Colleen.
Colleen was only let out late at night to do housework or to be tortured or sexually assaulted by Cameron Hooker.
Cameron Hooker believes that women are evil. Women are evil and they deserve to be punished. He also believes that women are there for his own pleasure. And if they don't meet his needs for pleasure, then he can feel justified in punishing them.
The 3 years that I was in there was very hard on me.
In 1984, 7 years after being kidnapped, Colleen convinced Cameron to let her take a job outside the home to help support the Hooker family. She began cleaning rooms at a local motel.
I was delighted just to be out of the box, and I was happy to be able to go out and work and whatever, just be anywhere but there and locked up in that box.
However, Colleen was reminded that being out of the box did not mean she was free.
At this point, they were letting me sleep in the back bathroom. They would put a chain around my neck and put it around the toilet.
Apparently spurred on by the more open living arrangements, Cameron Hooker began having sex with his wife and Colleen on alternate nights. He soon announced a plan to build a dungeon and collect more sex slaves.
One of the features of a sexual sadist is they enjoy power. Power over one becomes absolute. Power over two becomes absolute. If two are good, three would be better. It's simply proving to himself time and time again that he has the ability and the power to capture and control multiple human beings.
But the prospect of being forced to share her husband with even more women pushed Janice Hooker over the edge. Something changed in her outlook.
Janice began to see Colleen as a human being, someone who had terrible things done to her. They began to have conversations, and they developed a relationship that worked against Cameron Hooker.
That's when the relationship took on a different perspective. It wasn't slave, wife, it was two women sharing equally Cameron Hooker.
On August the 9th, 1984, Janice Hooker visited the pastor of her church. She told him everything about Colleen.
So he, of course, says, well, this is unnatural, this is not good, you need to get out.
Following the pastor's advice, Janice went to the motel where Colleen was working.
She says, the whole thing's a lie. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how could I believe this? And why is she waiting all this time to come to me and tell the truth? I mean, this is over 7 years later.
Colleen rang her father in Riverside to tell him she would be coming home. But before leaving Red Bluff, Colleen spoke to Cameron Hooker one more time.
I go over to the bus station. I went out to the payphone outside the bus station, and I called him up and I told him, I'm leaving and there's nothing you can do to stop me. He started crying. And I hung up the phone, and I got on the bus, and I left. It was fantastic. I was so happy. My family had many questions. And I didn't want to get into all the gory details because I already knew that they had suffered through so much.
But she eventually opened up.
She tells us that she was tortured and hung up and in a box. You know, it's hard to believe all the stuff that he had done to her and survive, you know.
Back in Red Bluff, Janice Hooker left her husband and went to the police.
Janice Hooker was extremely emotional, and she was obviously very, very scared.
But when Janice told her story, she was surprised by the response.
I was very skeptical. You know, if somebody starts telling you about keeping somebody in a wooden box underneath their waterbed for virtually years on end, that's very difficult for me to believe.
It's extremely hard for people to understand how such a thing could occur. And the reason it's difficult for us is because we don't have a frame of reference. We don't have any experience with this type of person, this type of victim, or this type of crime.
The Red Bluff police contacted Colleen, who confirmed everything Janice had told them.
I think we spent 2 days down there interviewing her, trying to obtain as much information as we could to span a 7-year period of time that she was abducted.
Armed with Janice's confession and Colleen's statement, on August the 22nd, 1984, the police arrested Cameron Hooker. But proving that he had committed the crimes would be much more difficult than anyone imagined. In August 1984, California authorities finally arrested Cameron Hooker. Police searched the Hooker residence and confiscated a number of items, but nothing that could prove that Colleen Stan had been held against her will. They were unaware that since the arrest, Janice Hooker had returned to her husband, and under his orders, she had destroyed everything in the home that could be connected to Colleen.
It's very difficult for people to see Janice as a victim because we equate the word victim with a lack of responsibility for actions taken. She, in fact, was a perpetrator. She was an offender. But she was also a victim of Cameron Hooker. That doesn't mean she's not responsible for any criminal action she may have taken.
But Janice didn't get rid of everything.
Christine McGuire and myself were in my office working and looking through some of the various magazines that he had, and this negative falls out. And I picked it up and put it to the light, and we discovered that it was a picture that Cameron had taken of the actual contract that he had Colleen sign.
Prosecutors finally had the evidence they needed to take the case to trial. Cameron Hooker was indicted for kidnapping, rape, and sexual assault.
We were able to bring into evidence at the trial whips, chains, the stretcher, sensory deprivation head boxes. We had the slave contract. He kept Colleen in a box under his waterbed for a number of years. We were able to reconstruct that and put that in the center of the courtroom, and it sat there every day during the course of the trial.
Janice Hooker agreed to testify against her husband in exchange for full immunity. But the prosecution knew their case ultimately rested on the testimony of Colleen Stan.
Colleen appeared to the jury to be very calm. She didn't look like or sound like she was out for revenge. There were times when she would appear a bit surprised when she described her own behavior. She didn't quite understand why she did certain things or why certain things happened, but she left it to the experts to explain to the jury why certain things happened.
Experts like Dr. Chris Hatcher.
Dr. Chris Hatcher, he was a clinical psychologist. He was expert in captivity cases, and he was able to kind of pull everything together for the jury, explain why it was that despite the appearance that she was free to come and go, she really was never free to come and go. Cameron Hooker, what he did was he tortured her, he whipped her, he beat her, he cut off all light, all sound. And he did this over a period of time, and he got her to the point where he could, in essence, break her and coerce her into a set of behaviors.
He helped me to understand that I didn't do anything wrong.
On October the 18th, 1984, Cameron Hooker took the stand in his own defense.
He told the jury flat out that he did kidnap her, and he kidnapped her because he did want a sex slave. But then at some point in time, he decided to set her free, but she chose to remain with him because he said by this time she had fallen in love with him. And he said that the sexual acts that he had with Colleen were in fact consensual and not rape.
His strategy didn't work. Cameron Hooker was found guilty on 10 counts. On November the 22nd, 1984, he was sentenced to up to 104 years in prison for sex crimes, kidnapping, and using a knife during a kidnapping. After the trial, Janice Hooker settled into a life of anonymity. She has refused to discuss her life with Cameron Hooker or her complicity in the crimes against Colleen Stan.
I don't really have good feelings towards Jan because I feel that even though I feel that she was also a victim, but she was free and she had choice. And I think that she could have made the choice to put an end to this way sooner than she did. You know, Jan could have saved all of us.
Cameron Hooker is eligible for release in 2022.
I definitely feel that he's a danger to society. I don't feel that he should ever be let out. He's not changed, but he does have a parole date, and I guess the only thing I can hope is that maybe they won't let him out.